By day, New Orleans wears a mask of music, color, and celebration. But when night falls over the French Quarter, the city remembers older things. On Chartres Street stands the Old Ursuline Convent, its upper shutters sealed tight against the Louisiana heat, and according to legend, against something far worse. Nearly 3 centuries ago, young women arrived from France carrying small wooden cases. They were meant to bring new life to a struggling colony. Instead, whispers claim they brought death across the Atlantic. They were called the Casket Girls, and some believe their cargo was never meant to remain locked away.
New Orleans has always kept its secrets close. Beneath wrought iron balconies, behind shuttered windows, and in the humid silence of the French Quarter, history lingers like a voice in an empty room. One legend tells of young women who crossed the Atlantic carrying small wooden cases and brought something far darker with them. They were called the Casket Girls. But were they truly the first vampires of New Orleans? Or were they ordinary women transformed into monsters by fear, rumor, and time? In the early 18th century, French Louisiana was young, remote, and overwhelmingly male. Traders, soldiers, trappers, and explorers gathered along the Mississippi River. But a permanent colony needed more than forts and commerce. It needed families. Church and colonial authorities looked across the ocean toward France and sought women willing, or pressured, to make the journey. The women who answered the call became known as the filles à la cassette, the girls with the small cases. They came from convents, schools, orphanages, and institutions across France. Their possessions were packed into compact wooden trunks: dresses, petticoats, letters, perhaps the few objects that remained of a life they were leaving behind. In time, the word cassette shifted in popular retelling. A small traveling case became a casket, and a piece of luggage became the seed of a nightmare. Their voyage was not a romantic passage into a new world. It took months. Ships departed from French ports, sometimes waiting long before they could sail. The Atlantic was unforgiving. Storms, disease, cramped quarters, and uncertainty shadowed every mile. Some travelers never reached the Gulf Coast at all. For those who did, New Orleans was not salvation. It was simply the next unknown. The first groups of these women arrived in Gulf Coast settlements, including Mobile and Biloxi. Later groups came to New Orleans, beginning around 1728. The city was only a decade old, more outpost than metropolis. For women accustomed to France, the heat, insects, mud, and relentless humidity of Louisiana must have felt alien. Their heavy European clothing was no match for the subtropical sun. In New Orleans, many of the women stayed with the Ursuline sisters until marriages were arranged. The nuns had arrived in 1727 to educate women and carry out their religious mission in the colony. Their convent became a place of order in a precarious settlement. But in later legend, its upper rooms would become something else entirely, a locked threshold between the living and the dead. The promised future was not always kind. Many women entered marriages arranged by necessity rather than affection. Colonial men often spent long periods away as trappers and traders, leaving their wives to run households under punishing conditions. Later stories describe abandonment, mistreatment, and women forced to survive by any means available. Whether every detail is true or embroidered by time, the hardship was real enough to leave a mark. Then the story takes its darkest turn. According to legend, the women's cases were stored on the 3rd floor of the Ursuline Convent as preparations were made for their return to France. When the nuns later opened the room, the luggage was said to be empty. The girls' possessions had vanished. Some versions claim the women had disappeared as well. Others insist that something had escaped from the cases, something that could not survive in sunlight. The vampire element is a much later addition to the tale. The women's pale complexions, their mysterious caskets, the sealed upper floor, and New Orleans' love affair with the macabre created the perfect folklore machine. Over generations, history gathered shadows. Fiction added fangs, and the Casket Girls became New Orleans' original vampires, not because evidence proved it, but because the city had learned how to make legend feel alive. The true legacy of the Casket Girls is more human, and perhaps more haunting, than the vampire legend. They were women carried across an ocean to build lives in an unfamiliar colony. They endured distance, disease, social expectation, isolation, and uncertainty. The Old Ursuline Convent still stands. Its stories still echo through New Orleans. And somewhere between the documented past and the locked room of legend, the Casket Girls are waiting, forever remembered not only as mothers of a city, but as its most enduring ghosts.
The truth may be less monstrous than the legend, but no less haunting. The Casket Girls were not proven vampires. They were young women sent across a merciless ocean, carrying small wooden chests and the fragile hope of a new beginning. Yet in New Orleans, history does not simply fade. It changes shape in the dark. A cassette becomes a casket. Closed shutters become a prison. And an old convent becomes a doorway to something no one can prove or fully forget. The 3rd floor holds records and storage now. At least, that is what history insists. But when midnight settles over Chartres Street and the wind presses against those shuttered windows, the city still seems to listen. Perhaps the girls are gone. Or perhaps some stories survive because somewhere in the dark, they are still waiting to be invited in.